Hello, Matteo here. Thank you for visiting the channel. This is the safety video. The content covered will be helmet fit and some basic info, some of my favorite safety gear, as well as how to safety check a bicycle. To begin, sounds patronizing, but I always like to cover some of the basic info that a lot of people who wear helmets every day don't know. Beginning with helmets do have an expiry date. It is every 5 years, unless there are some helmets that I've never heard of. The date of fabrication will be on the inside of the helmet. Whether or not it's a marketing ploy by the industry or not, I'm not sure, but the industry says that UV will degrade the expanded polystyrene foam, making it softer over time, and that if you've dropped your helmet enough times, that it could have micro cracks that could even be hard to see, that would compromise the functionality of the helmet. So above and beyond that, the fit of the helmet is also very important. The helmet is designed to hopefully round off and deflect an impact. But if the helmet is loose on the head and moves on the head and changes the angle of impact, then you can get a neck injury on top of an impact injury. So it's very important for it to be tight. The degree of tightness begins with a dial. Sorry, my helmet is all in a nut. Begins with a dial on the back of the helmet. A lot of kids' helmets won't have this dial unless you're paying a lot of money for your kid's helmet, so that's okay if it doesn't have one. The dial would be tightened when the helmet is on the head with the straps undone to such a degree so that when you wiggle your head or lean over and wiggle, the helmet shouldn't move on the head very easily and it shouldn't fall off. So once you have your general skull fit, then the straps, the rule for how tight these should be is called 2V1. I like to say to be one with your bicycle, you must first 2V1 with your helmet. The 2 stands for 2 fingers between the eyebrows and the bottom and the front of the helmet. The V's refer to these connection points directly below the earlobe is where they should come to, and the 1 refers to you should only be able to fit 1 finger, approximately 1/4 inch, between the chin strap and chin. These 3 points, especially on helmets if you're paying under $100 and the quality of buckles isn't always that great, these 3 points get loose very easily, and so it's best practice to get them in a spot and then sew them in a place with dental floss or doubled up thread or fishing line or anything tough. So there's that. Aside from that, to begin with my first bit of safety gear, you'll see this helmet mirror is designed to fit the contour of the helmet. It is my favorite helmet mirror. It is definitely best practice to do a full blind spot shoulder check, whether you're driving or riding a bike, but I very much appreciate having a constant view of what's going on behind me in my peripheral vision. And so this mirror is the only one that I've ever found that it doesn't wiggle loose involuntarily over time. These nodes keep it all very stiff. And then it has the largest mirror that I've ever found for any helmet mirror. It's made by Efficient Velo Tools. I sell it cheaper than what you'd get it on the internet for, especially if you're shipping it from the States to Canada. The mirror is called the Safe Zone Helmet Mirror. It has a 5-year guarantee. Great mirror. You can get handlebar mirrors as well, but most of the handlebar mirror designs, they're very small and then it's farther away from your eyes. You can get bicycle handlebar mirrors that are the size of a side view mirror on a car, which are really great. But most of them are very small. Most of them are mounted on the end of your handlebars, so that if you lean your bike against anything, it gets bonked off. And then you're looking a little more away from directly in front of you when looking at one of those in comparison to just checking your peripheral vision with a helmet mirror that's close to your eye. So the next bit of safety gear is made by Mountain Equipment Co-op, an outdoor equipment store and clothing store in Canada. This is the Samui air horn. I think it is the second, there's a lot of versions, but the Samui 2, I think, air horn. It is a 120 decibel air horn. It has a volume setting. It compresses air into a water bottle up to 80 psi with a bicycle pump via the Schrader valve. It, at a medium volume setting, will give you about 15 short little toots, and its only downside is that it doesn't work under 0 degrees Celsius. The condensation of the tubing freezes up and it'll squeak at you, so you'd have to get an electronic alternative. But it's very great. It'll save your life. If a car is really about to hit you, and if you're not someone who's vocally inclined to being really loud, and the car's music is up and the windows are up, then a bell isn't always going to save your life. This, to give you an example, at its medium volume setting, sounds like this. Yeah, so a great little device. I sell them for $35, or you can get them from Mountain Equipment Co-op. The last bit of safety gear that I like to share is this is a rear light by Relight, R-E-E-L-I-G-H-T. They're from Denmark. I don't know many bike shops in North America selling them, but you can order directly from the company. It's one of my favorites because a lot of people can get in a dangerous situation where you've either forgotten to charge your lights, have to replace the batteries, or they get stolen. So this light avoids all of those things. It doesn't have any battery. It's an induction magnet system, so this strap allows it to strap to the front fork or to the rear seat stay of the frame. So it's strapped and it would pick up the movement of the wheel, and then it has a cable that connects these two things. It's like something you have to deal with, a little extra wire. But the cable would then connect to the light, and then the light would always be flashing or constant depending on how fast you're going. The Nova by Relight, this specific model, also keeps the light on when you've stopped at an intersection for a certain amount of time as well. So it's always on, no batteries needed to be replaced. And then it's very hard to steal. It requires, you'll see in this round cylinder, there's a 2mm Allen key bolt that is required to loosen it off the frame, and most thieves don't keep with them a 2mm Allen key bolt. So it's constant, it's always there. Converting it from the Denmark currency, I think it's about $80 per light. So it's not very expensive compared to how expensive some lights can get. And it's very hard to steal. So it's one of my favorites. Aside from that, the safety check of a bicycle, to begin with the front of the bike. Actually, let me start with wheels. So with a lot of bicycles, you'll have quick release levers. The quick release lever is very handy for taking the bike off. It's also very handy for thieves to take your bike off. So best practice is to get a locking skewer. You can pay anywhere from $20 to like $60 for a locking skewer. The lower end ones can be removed with vice grip or pliers, like the Pentagon key locking skewer. Then once you get up to the Abus and the Pinhead, it's one of my favorite locking skewers, then you would require like an electric grinder to take the wheel off. So it's a lot better, and you're paying just maybe $20 more, 20 or $40 more. So they're nice and they're quick. Definitely best to get locking skewers. But if you have them, it's also very important to know how tight these locking skewers should be. If ever you've removed your wheel to store the bike in a car or anywhere, when you put it back on, the degree of tightness that they require can be increased by clockwise turning either side and then holding the other side stationary. Turning this side, holding this side, or turning this side, holding this side. And the degree of tightness wants to be so much so that when the lever is at its horizontal position, you begin to feel resistance, but not so much resistance that you can't completely close it perpendicular, and then it will say closed on the outside side. It's best practice as well to point the lever towards the back of the bike or up, especially if you're mainly if you're trail riding, because it has happened to people that they've broken a stick underneath their tire, the stick has kicked up and opened their lever, and then their wheel comes out from beneath them. So locking skewers, or you could hose clamp a quick release lever into place, would be a cheap little fix, and always pointing it up. Especially if you have a quick release lever, it's also good to get in the habit, if you're locking your bike outside in a place you don't trust, to get in the habit of grabbing your wheel and shaking it laterally to see if someone tampered with your wheel and attempted to steal it, maybe got interrupted, but now your wheel is loose, to make sure it's not. If the wheel is tight on and you still feel a wiggle, then it's probably your axle is loose, and that's not dangerous, it's just not ideal. The next thing to take a look at on the front of the bike is V-brake arms are definitely a liability, especially on cheaper quality bikes, department store bikes, kids' bikes. The V-brake, to give you a closer look, is basically just a, oh, sorry, I lost my other half of my V-brake arm. The V-brake is basically a arm that has a rectangular bracket that holds a silver noodle, brake noodle we like to call it, that then clamps the cable with the other arm on the other side. So the liability, especially on the front brake, because the front brake is 70% of your braking power on a bicycle, is that this rectangular bracket, over time, the partition that allows you to disconnect the brakes to open the brakes up to take the wheel out, that partition over time will bend open wide and get too loose, and then it won't hold the brake noodle, and then that will happen when you are pulling the brakes, so you don't want it to happen. So preventative measures would be buying higher quality V-brake arms that have thicker metal. Cheapest preventative measure would be just getting a hose clamp. If you don't know what these are, 3/4 inch hose clamp, and hose clamping around the rectangular bit at its partition so that it won't open. If you don't have any of that, you can take a look at it and see if it's wider than what you just saw on my example, and you can squeeze it tight with pliers to get you home. But it's definitely good to be aware of and to take some preventative measures with that, especially on kids' bikes. The next safety item on the front of a bicycle, you're not going to be able to see the handlebars, it's a little too high, but maybe. So the handlebar connection to the front wheel is also very important. If it gets loose and the cyclist hits a bump on the road, their hands go one way, their wheel goes a different way, and they wipe out pretty quick. So the quick way to make sure that this isn't happening, if the bike was on the ground, I would hold the front wheel between my feet and my knees, I'd grab the handlebars, and I'd try forcing the handlebars separate of the wheel's direction, left or right. If it came away loose very easily, then it would need to be tightened up. And on a lot of bicycles, yeah, you can see the silver head. On a lot of bicycles, especially like kids' bikes, it will be what's called a threaded system. You'll see that little kind of cap, that's the head of a bolt of this threaded system. It'll either be a bolt on the top, a nut on this top of this bolt that will tighten it up, or it'll be an Allen key that will be recessed into the stem. So tightening that will tighten up the connection between the handlebars and the front wheel. If it's not a threaded system, but it is a threadless system, then you'll also see a vertical Allen key bolts on the top, but that is not what tightens it on the threadless system. It is the two horizontal bolts that will tighten up the connection between the handlebars and the front wheel. So it's good to make sure that that is tight, especially if the bike just got hit in the handlebars or fell over. I forgot to say that a safety check for a bicycle is good anytime the bicycle gets in a crash or falls over, anytime that the bike has been in a car wreck on a highway or a bumpy road, or just generally like 2-3 times a year. It's a best practice to do a safety check on the bike. The last safety check is to do with the rear derailleur. If I can get this a little closer for you. So, the rear derailleur on a bicycle, that which changes the gears on the back, is a liability because it can jam the chain. When the chain jams, then the pedals jam. When the pedals jam, if you're going really fast, you're going down a hill, people have catapulted themselves over their bicycle. The preventative measure for protecting a rear derailleur, if you ask at a bike shop or look online for a derailleur hanger guard or cover, it is a loop of a U of metal that you can't really see too well, but if you have two eyelets on the back of your frame here, or two holes in which to thread into, either for a rack or a fender stereotypically, then you can bolt in this metal protector and it will cover your derailleur a little bit. Other than that, the preventative measure to make sure it never hurts you is to know how to do this check. So to check the extremes of the range of movement of the derailleur, you can flip your bike upside down or raise the rear wheel in any way. And basically what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pushing the derailleur to its extreme towards the spokes to see if the arm, if it was bent, then the arm of the derailleur would jam into their spokes and rip them all out. Not all of them, but a few of them potentially. or the chain could get jammed in between the spokes and the gear cluster. A lot of bikes will have a plastic little pie plate or a guard here to prevent that, but these guards wear away with the UV over time and will fall off. And then I check the other extreme. I'd pull the derailleur between the frame and the gear cluster to see if it was physically capable of getting jammed in there. Sorry for the squeak. So the way that you would do this is, with your one hand you would grab the pedal and be pedaling. With your other hand you'd put your forefinger, sorry it's still a little far away. There we go. So you'd have the pedal with your one hand, your forefinger would be on the back of the derailleur, and your thumb would be on what I like to call the elbow of the derailleur. So forefinger here, thumb here. And while pedaling, I would push with my thumb towards the spokes so the chain goes onto the largest ring or the easiest ring, checking to see if the chain flew off or if the arm went into the spokes. So I pushed to that extreme, making sure that it didn't fly off, and then I would grab that derailleur elbow and I'd pull it towards myself to see if it was physically capable of jamming the chain in between the frame and the gear cluster. Now, sometimes you can push and pull more than what the derailleur would be able to do with just the shifter at your handlebars, but it's best practice to check it just in case and have it tighter than looser, I'd say. So if it came off in either direction, it came off on my harder side a little bit. On most rear derailleurs, you will see two Phillips head bolts. They will be labeled H and L stereotypically. There will either be on the back, on the front here, or they'll be behind, a little hidden from view. So H refers to the hardest or the smallest ring, L refers to the largest or the easiest ring, and tightening that corresponding bolt or clockwise turning is what limits the range of movement going outward from center. So if the chain came off into the spokes, I would tighten the L labeled bolts to limit its range of movement towards the spokes. If it came off into the frame, then I would tighten the H labeled bolt to limit its range of movement towards the hardest gear. That is almost it. The last thing, which is especially good for parents, when you're trying to make a bicycle fit to your growing child, it is good to know that the seat post, as well as the handlebar stem, has a maximum height that is allowed to go to. When you raise the seat post, you will see a series of dashes. If you go too high, that will say like minimum insertion or something along those lines, or just some dashes. That is the industry safety standard saying if you go above this line, there's not enough metal left inside the frame to prevent it from potentially breaking and cracking over. So you want to adhere to that line when you're trying to raise the seat. And then also for threaded systems, you can raise this stem. You need to know that if ever you want to, that A, it has a dotted line for how high it can be raised, but that also that Allen key or nut-headed bolt never wants to be turned counterclockwise more than 2 rotations to be safe, because you can disconnect it from this conical nut inside of your steer tube, and then it's very hard to reconnect. So you would counterclockwise turn it, max 2 rotations, then you could hold the front wheel between your feet and your knees, grab the handlebars, and you could shimmy the handlebars up. If you have a threadless system for your bike and you're wanting it to grow, then you can buy for like 30 to 50 bucks an adapter to raise the stack about like 3 to 6 inches is probably the biggest one that I've ever seen. That then concludes the safety check video. Thank you for checking in, and I hope you enjoy the following video content. Cheers.